We're learning the weekly Torah, and hopefully we'll have a connection today. We're not in the usual place.
Yeah.
Try like this.
Go to the corridor.
So the story.
So there I'm flying to New York.
Yeah.
Actually I was flying to Miami in order to get to New York on an American Airlines direct flight.
Bring it up a little. Yeah.
Which is a great flight. It's absolutely beautiful. 14 hours of sitting there, and if you'll pardon the expression, getting sore where you're sitting down. Even if you're sitting in premium economy, after a while, you just can't sit any longer. It's physically impossible. And I noticed that a lot of the notifications were done by the stewards in Hebrew and in English. So in the middle of the night, at 2 o'clock in the morning, somewhere it was, when I was so bored out of my mind, I walked into the business lounge, or the business part of the plane, and the stewardess said to me, "You can't come in here." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm sitting right here in premium economy, right behind." So she said, "Okay, what do you want?" I said, "I want a cup of tea." And I said to her, her name was Shoshi, I said to her, "How come you speak Hebrew?" Because I heard her giving the announcements. So she said, "Well, I was born in Naharia, and I left, I don't know, a young girl, 12, 13, 14 or something like that, or maybe immediately after my marriage, got married, had a couple of kids, I divorced my husband, and before we divorced, and before anything else, we left Israel and went to live in Miami. Now she said, I don't live in Miami anymore. I live in a place called Atlanta, Georgia, and I drink Coca-Cola." So we were talking.
And I drink Pepsi. That would
Right,
be more
right.
more of an information
Right.
for us.
So we were talking about all sorts of different things. So a very friendly young lady. She was 70, but she was quite very
70.
yeah.
Wow.
And I said to her, "You light Shabbos candles?" Because we were talking about how she's concerned that her grandchildren will be Jewish or not be Jewish. And Baruch Hashem, her 2 children married Jewish. One came to live in Israel. They're not from. So she says, "What's going to be for the next generation?" So I said, "Do you light Shabbos candles?" So she said, "Well, sometimes." As I understood, she comes to Israel once a week and goes back once a week. So many times she's flying on Friday night, so she doesn't light candles. And so we started talking about all sorts of things. So I was trying to think of something to say to her that would encourage her to realize that the good Lord's in heaven and looking after her. So I said, "Listen," I said, "there's a very important thing that the Jewish people say when they get up in the morning, and it's called Moide Ani." So I opened my telephone, and I showed her Moide Ani Lefonecho Chai Pavrom, and I translated it for her, even though she speaks Hebrew. I explained it to her. So I said, every morning when you get up, the first thing you have to do is you have to say thank you to Hashem for giving you back your life, and you're alive and well. I said, then you make a connection with Hashem, and then Hashem will help with other things. So she went ballistic. She said, "This is amazing, absolutely unbelievable. I've never seen anything like this." So she said, "I want a copy." So I said, "Okay, so copy it." So she took a picture of it from my phone, and she called over her friend, who was also Jewish, and had come on Aliyah to Israel, but from France many years before, and she showed it to her, and she said, "That's it, okay, so I'm going to say this every single day from now on." So I said, "Okay, but if you say it on Shabbos, be careful, you can't do it from the phone. You have to write it out and only say it without using the phone." "Okay." And then I said, "Well, what about this business of lighting Shabbos candles?" So she said, "Well, it doesn't work out sometimes." So I said, "Fine," I said, "but just because it doesn't work out sometimes, the other times you can also light candles. Every single mitzvah is an inyan all to itself." So she said, "Wow," she said, "some Chabad rabbi told me that in Atlanta, Georgia." I said, "That's it." I said, "Every individual mitzvah is individual mitzvah." And then, so we talked about that. I said, "But the thing is that when you're at home and you light Shabbos candles, you must be very careful to light them before Shabbos comes in." So she said to me, "Why?" I said, "Because you're not allowed to strike a match on Shabbos." She said, "You're not allowed to strike a match on Shabbos? You serious?" She said, "Yeah." She never heard of it. Never heard the fact you're not allowed to light a match, light fire on Shabbos, Very nice person, but totally disconnected. So I said to her, "Do it properly. You'll do a mitzvah, and when you do it, you do it, and when you don't, you don't." And Baruch Hashem, she says she's going to say Madani every day. It's acknowledging that Hashem's there, so it's a good start to the day. That Hashem will acknowledge that she's there. So that's the story.
Baruch Hashem. Very good. So we're talking about that Isaac lived his whole life in a state of the world to come. because of
Right.
the Akedah.
Right.
The Rebbe
Which means
conti-
what exactly?
what?
What is that exactly?
Which means you're in a state of bliss, which is not because everything is great, but because you know that everything you do is Hashem doing it.
So
It takes
you're
the
looking
pressure
at
off.
You're looking at the pneumius of everything?
So you see the Hashem behind everything. So even regarding yourself, you can do very calmly with serenity. We also find this phenomenon elsewhere throughout history, where the neshama of other individuals left their bodies during their lifetime. Yitzchak's circumstances, what does he mention here? 3. Where are the footnotes? Well, they put footnotes, but then they forgot. Oh, here it is. So here they write like this. Nach records a number of incidents, meaning the Bible records a number of incidents where the dead were brought back to life. So Eliyahu revived.
The child of the Shulamis.
Right. So that was a Torah 2 weeks ago. Eliyahu revived the lifeless son of a woman from Tzorfas, which is really from Tzor, right? Similarly, Elisha revived the son of the Shunammite woman. So who was that?
Who was
That
it?
was Yonah, right?
Oh, yeah?
Eliyahu revived Chavakuk.
Oh, yeah?
They became prophets. It's not very surprising, actually. After he had passed away. In another incident, Moabite marauders raided Eretz Yisrael. A group of Israelites were in the middle of burying a corpse. When catching a glimpse of the approaching troops, they dropped the corpse into the grave of the recently deceased Elisha. And the corpse rolled, incidentally touching Elisha, and miraculously came back to life. So these are examples. By the way, I don't remember what happened to this person, this corpse. Something happened to him. So it's a very interesting thing that this became a big deal. The resurrection became a big deal only later. It wasn't talked about so much. And only after the first temple was destroyed, when Ezekiel has his prophecy of the dry bones, does the notion of resurrection for everyone become central. Right? Because in the Torah, the sages are hard-pressed to find an example of resurrection. So the closest they come is that they say that Moshe Rabbeinu said, Hinei anochi shochev v'kama am hazeh. So they say, behold, I am lying down, meaning dying, and rising, which is not what the verse is saying. The verse is saying, behold, I will die, and then these people will rise and rebel against God. But the sages turn it into, behold, I am lying down, and I will rise. I will rise. In any case, so he says there were more examples of this. Yitzchak's circumstance was unique in that he brought that which he had experienced above back down to this world, which again is a unique, because Yonah and Chavakuk, they might have had exactly that. That may be why they became prophets. But by Isaac, it's throughout his life. We know that it's explicit. In this way, he lived the rest of his life incorporating these heavenly experiences within the physical world. This will be explained further on. We will now make a mathematical calculation that will bring us to the conclusion that Isaac actually spent time in the higher worlds during his lifetime. Right? How is this? The Medrash writes that when Yaakov and Esav turned 13, each one began to pursue his own desires. Yaakov went to study Torah, and Esav began a life of idolatry. The Medrash elaborates that Avram was meant to live 180 years, but that Hashem didn't want him to be pained by seeing his grandson Esau sinning. So he shortened his life by 5 years, and Avram lived until 175. After making a simple calculation, it is obvious that something clearly doesn't add up. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak when he was 100 years old, and Yitzchak gave birth to Yaakov and Esau when he was 60, which means that Avram was 160 when they were born, right? According to this calculation, when they turned 13 and Esau began to sin, how old was Avram?
173.
173. And he lived for 2 more years, right? Because he passed away when he was 175. If this is the case, Avram indeed saw Esav sinning for 2 years. If so, it seems that Avram was not spared the pain of seeing his grandson sin. One explanation is that for those first 2 years, Esav sinned in secret. So although Avram was still alive, he was unaware of Esav's wrongdoings. This explanation seems difficult to understand, for it was possible for Esav to sin if it was possible for Esav to sin in secret,
Why didn't he carry on?
Hashem could have ensured that he continued sinning in this way for another 5 years and would not have needed to shorten Avram's lifespan. Another explanation is that after the Akedah, after the binding, Isaac was informed that Rivka had been born and that she was the one he was destined to marry. He needed to wait for her to be 3 years old in order for her to be of marriageable age. And during those years, he ascended to Gan Eden, meaning he wasn't in this world completely. That's what the Zohar says. Meaning that he was in the realm that is beyond time. Therefore, although on this earth time had passed, which is why Avram had grown a few years older, Yitzchak remained the same age until he returned to this world. So Yitzchak was how old? He wasn't 160. He wasn't 60 years old when his children were born. How old was he? 63. If he was 63, so Avram wasn't 160 when they were born. He was also 163. So then, 13 years later, that's when he passed away. Okay, so that's the calculation. But what does it require? That's how the Zohar learns this. So the Zohar says, for 3 years, Yitzchak was in this world, but not in this world. Literally. Meaning, he was sort of like the example of this in modern science is time dilation. Right? That if you go fast enough close to the speed of light, then relative to somewhere that isn't passing or traveling at the speed of light, your time stands still and theirs continues to move. Another way of thinking of this is like this, that we have this famous equation from Einstein called E equals mc squared. There's a lot of energy in everything. So where is this energy? So people imagine, if I could turn you into a nuclear bomb, you would get all the energy out. That's not what he means. That's not what it means. This energy is not captured in the body. It's not here. It's being expended all the time. Where's it going? It's going to move through time. Right? So if I'm not moving, here I am sitting down. So this tremendous energy that my mass has, E equals mc squared, right? Let's say 80 kilograms times c squared, right? 300,000 kilometers per second. Squared, that's a lot. Where's all that energy going? Since I'm not moving through space, I'm moving through time. But if you start moving through space very quickly, to the point where you move at the speed of light, then all that energy is now already being used up for your movement through space. So there's no energy left to move through time. Okay, that's, I think, the right way to think about time dilation. Not the way that it's usually thought that time shrinks. It doesn't shrink. It's just you have less energy to move through time if you're expending the energy on moving through space. Okay, so anyway, but that would be the modern equivalent of somebody being in the world and yet time not moving. So he was moving in his mind at the speed of light. Right? That would be like the equivalent. So although Yitzchak was 60 when Yaakov and Esau were born, he would have been 62, but did not gain those 2 years in time. Sorry, he said 2 years, not 3. While he was in Gan Eden, a world that is beyond time. Avram had continued to live an additional few years in this world, 2 more years. So this means that at the time of their birth, Avram was actually 162. At the time of their bar mitzvah, 13 years later, Avram was 175. So according to this explanation, he would not have seen Esav sinning at all before he passed away. There are times when people are able to elevate themselves to a level that is beyond time. And upon their return, it is evident that they had been on a higher spiritual plane. Who did this, for instance? So we are told that the Baal Shem Tov once informed his brother-in-law about an event that would only occur later on. Right? He wrote to him a letter, and it was describing something that would happen long after the letter was actually sent. The Baal Shem Tov was aware of his future occurrences because he had been in the higher spiritual world of Yetzirah, where an entire 15 years can be seen with one glance. So if all you need to do is elevate yourself to the world of Yetzirah. You don't even need to go very far. And then the ratio is one moment is 15 years. Unlike Yitzchak, who was completely removed from this world in the confines of time, the Baal Shem Tov traveled to higher places while still retaining his connection with this physical world. So that was the difference. The Baal Shem Tov davened about this a lot. So at the same time that he was at a higher level, he did not divorce himself from this physical plane. And so, why did he daven for that? Why did he ask Hashem for that? Because people would come to him for advice, for a bracha, for something. And if he's at a higher spiritual plane, he doesn't see it. Like we said, Isaac doesn't see. He can't see, as it were, what's going on here. He's not here. He sees the godliness behind everything. So he doesn't connect to you and me. He doesn't understand what you and me are seeing.
That's what he meant when he was blind?
Perhaps. He was blind to this world completely. And that's what they say. They say that he became blind because the tears of the angels came into his eyes. What is that trying to say? Obviously, angels don't have tears. So what are you saying? That the motarei mochin, always the tears, are the residue from the mind. What the mind can't even contain. So what the angels can't even contain, that went into his eyes. He could see that. So even what an angel can't understand about the world, he saw, he understood. So for all intents and purposes, this world was like nothing for him. He didn't see it anymore. We have to end. So Yitzchak had the unique ability to come back to this physical world and live within the reality he had experienced above. When Yaakov came to Yitzchak to receive the brachos, the blessings, wearing Esav's clothing, Yitzchak told him the clothes smelled like the field that was blessed by Hashem, referring to the Gan Eden, to the Garden of Eden. Generally, when a person descends or ascends from one world to another, he must completely forget his previous experience so that his former level of spirituality does not disrupt the new one. This is why a baby must be tapped on the lip before it enters this world in order to forget the revealed godliness it experienced in the mother's womb. People say he knows the whole Torah because that's what the Gemara says. But really he sees the spiritual world. Similar, it says about David that he saw all 5 worlds. Similarly, a soul must forget all that it saw in this physical world before it can ascend above. After we pass away, we also need to forget everything. However, Yitzchak was able to bring down the feeling of Gan Eden to this physical world, which explains why he was able to recognize its unique aroma on his son's clothing. So we'll continue tomorrow,
Bezrat Hashem.
God willing.